What's the way to do Durham, lad? You all cover that, no?
Hello, good evening, and welcome to this program about Rodney Groundings. I'm your host, Deon Abrams, and with me on the program this evening is Dr. David Hinds, and we'll be talking about things that are happening within the society, political and social issues that are affecting the Guyanese society. Welcome to the program after a long hiatus, Dr. Hinds.
Yes, thank you very much, Deon. It's good to be back. Yeah.
So, well, we want to extend condolences. A lot of young people are passing well, not only in Buxton, but when you watch that announcement, you see across the East Coast and even in South and so on, that there has been a lot of deaths of young people, and you're wondering what is really happening. If it's an effect of the poor health system or something, but it's troubling, and that we're losing. I know in Buxton we have lost a number of persons over the past few months. So we want to extend condolences to all those grieving families and hope that this trend is going to cut pretty shortly. I just want to, I know you're a man dealing with West Indian affairs and so on. Just briefly to touch on cricket, what is happening with West Indies cricket, really?
Oh my, yeah, it's getting worse. We have diagnosed the problem a long time, and that is that we are not producing the breadth of talent that we used to in the old days, partly because we have not caught up with the rest of the world. Cricket, like any other game now, is part of the technological development that's happening in the world. If you look at a cricket game now, you have the DRS, you have this, you have that, you have all these technological developments in which people are able to analyze cricketers and bring them. And we have not invested in that kind of infrastructure in our region, and the world caught up with us, passed us, and continues, and we are left behind. And so that's one of the problems. The second problem, of course, is the arrival of T20 cricket, which has done so much for the economic well-being of cricketers. And the traditional cricket authorities have not been able to match these franchises in terms of what they could pay cricketers. A third-rate cricketer could go to Texas on the weekend there and, make 3-4 times what he or she would make in a series in the West Indies. And so therefore our cricketers have gravitated towards the franchises and are not playing in our domestic cricket. You see, the domestic cricket is the nursery. All right, you're talking about in Guyana county cricket, and then you move from county cricket, but even before that, club cricket, county cricket, then you get to playing for your territory, then you get to playing for the A teams, and then the West Indies. And you're not having players coming through that process because the players are gone. In the old days, you would have Clive Lloyd would come back and play for DCC. Lance Gibbs will play club cricket, and county cricket, all the stars would come back and play county cricket. Now the quote-unquote stars are not playing in these leagues, and so therefore cricketers are not getting to play among themselves and play with the quality cricketers and up their game. So that's another problem. And I think one of the other problems that I think is the one that even if you get the others right, you have to get that right, and that is the commitment to the nation, the commitment to Guyana, the commitment to the Caribbean. You hear cricketers talk now about playing for the fans. You would never hear Vivian Richards or Michael Marshall talk about playing for the fans. They would say playing for the Caribbean people, because the Caribbean people are more than fans of the game. Right? It's our lifeblood. It's the one area in life when the the rules are the same. We beat the rest of the world for 20 years. The poorest cricketing nation, when the rules are the same, we conquer the rest of the world. And so therefore, for us in the Caribbean, it's the most extreme way in which we can stand anywhere in the world and say, I'm equal to you because of cricket. So cricket is much more than a game. It's a expression of who we are. It's a way of righting the wrongs of the past. So that when an England comes to the Caribbean and play and we beat them 5-0 in 1984 and 1988, we say we blackwash them because here are the colonized now beating the colonizers at a game that they invent to keep us in line. And so therefore cricket became more than just a game. Today I think among our cricketers there is not that nationalist passion. Alright? And so people are playing for the money, they're playing for the fun of the game, and there's no commitment to the nation. And I think that is the heart of the problem, because you're recruiting cricketers as you're recruiting athletes, as you're recruiting politicians from among the society. And if people in the society feel the nation is not committed to them, why should they be committed to the nation? When a young man or a young woman looks at what happened recently in the Dharam Lal case, where here is a powerful man alleged to have committed an offense, and everything was done to make the system get him off without not even half of a day in court. And then you open the paper 2 days later and you see two young working class men accused of the same against life. When you're a young man in Port Morant or New Amsterdam or Den Amstel or Buxton, as the case may be, when you see that, you feel the system is not working for you, it's not working, so why should you work for the system? So with a bat in your hand and a ball in your hand, you're working for yourself rather than the nation, because the nation does not work for you. And I think that's a big problem for us, not only in cricket, but in all spheres of life. It may be the extreme in Guyana, but it's the case throughout the Caribbean, where the nation state has not worked for our young people coming through.
I want to come back to that, though, that is because people are talking all over the country about the fact that, here there are these two men who are sentenced to life without parole and so on. And you had this big furore. Up to now, people can't get access to the young child and so on. It's an amazing thing. And the system, according to the president, was allowed to work. But we'll talk. Apart from that, what you mentioned in cricket, Guyana has had, over the years, issues related to cricket. And I've been discussing only last week with people who are within the cricket fraternity. And even though they're saying that Sanasi might have had issues, that it is worse now. That there are efforts to basically wipe black people out of the cricketing scene in terms of management and so on. They've gotten rid of Foster, they've gotten rid of even coaches, and now they're targeting the elements like the senior people in Georgetown, in Demerara and so on. And it was highlighted to me that, and this is not only from Afro-Guyanese speaking. I spoke to one, he was a former student of mine, and I asked his father, I said, man, your son was doing well in cricket. Is he still playing the game? He said, why not play no more, man? Because I share rich people, them pick me again for go for play the game. No matter how good you're good, once you get the money. Yeah. And one gentleman who was on the cricketing management actually told me that, there was a youngster who performed absolutely well in the regional under-19 tournament. And when they were picking a team for another tournament, a regional tournament, he was left off, a guy who only made 19 out of 4 matches and so on. But the person who was picked is a friend, rich people, of someone on the board, cricket board. And so this how does a youngster feel knowing that he came out on top in terms of bowling and batting in the regional tournament, and then he's left off out of the
yeah, you know, there has always been in our cricket charges of insularity at the level of the Caribbean, charges of the rich versus the poor. If you're from the country, it's harder to get in the team than if you're from the town. I grew up in our village in about a chap named Pascal, who they said was one of the best batsmen this country has ever produced, but he couldn't get a tongue to practice because he had to write it down. He was too poor, and so never really made the team. So you've always had those stories. Now, however, in an era like this, where the society itself has become so much polarized in terms of social class, in terms of race and ethnicity, that the game cricket, like all other endeavors in life, began to mirror that social divide in our society. I remember former President Granger talking about apartheid in education, and he was making the point that if you're poor, look at what your education outcome is going to be when it comes to these exams. And since our education is linked to employment, it's linked to sports, it's linked to everything, you're going to see that mirroring itself in the other areas of life. And I'm getting to a point. If you look at this MGCA results, and you're an educator, you look at the top 1%, look at the schools that they're coming from, look at the areas that they're coming from. And then I saw an analysis in Stablet News that says Region 1, Region 9, Region 8, and I think Region 7 where Amerindians predominate. No students from those regions are in the top 1%. So Granger's thesis rings through. Now, Granger was talking about this in 2011, 2012. A decade later, it's really manifesting itself in the most brutal way. So I am not surprised to hear that in cricket that is manifest. More so, because there is no accountability. Remember, the government doesn't control cricket boards. So these are private people, private clubs that are controlling the management of the game. They are accountable to the Cricket West Indies. They're not accountable. The cricket board here is accountable to Cricket West Indies. They're not accountable to anybody here in Guyana. So once they tie up an arrangement with Cricket West Indies, they do what they like. And so you see it happen at the West Indies level. I mean, we just got beaten inside 3 days with what I would call a club team. Then you have people like Puran and Hetmeyer playing festival cricket in Texas right now, and you're getting your butt kicked in 3 days. Something is wrong. Why every other country in the world, despite all the war for money, they are able to get their best cricketers on the park 75% of the time, and we can't get our best cricketers on the park 10% of the time? Are you saying that there's something essentially wrong with West Indians? That we are the only people in the world that are running where the money is and neglecting the nation? It says something about those who manage the game. Those who manage the game. Hetmeyer made himself available, and Desmond Haynes, who should know better, says to Hetmeyer that we are not going to pick you because the captain told me that the boys who did well in South Africa, we want to give them another run. We gave them a run and they couldn't beat Netherlands. They couldn't beat club teams. And so the kind of and Jason Holder talked about insularity recently after we were beaten there in Zimbabwe. So you're seeing at the top the favoritism, right? And it comes down to the bottom, because if you're at the bottom and you're looking up and you're seeing the top governing the game through favoritism, then you are going to do the same. And then when you look inside your nation state and you see the state, the government, governing based on favoritism, you understand where you can practice favoritism and get away with it, you are going to do it. So the long and short of it is our cricket is a reflection of the way we are organizing our society, the way we are governing our society, the social relations in the society. All of that is reflected in our cricket, because our cricket is part of our large mosaic of life.
Right. That's a fair analysis of the situation. But I mean, a particular concern, is that, and this was even during Mr. Nasser's time, is the isolation of African areas where Pleasance, Boxing, Bowling Grove, these where cricket used to be played. They're not playing. And somebody was telling me a couple of years ago, during the Sinasi time, that one of the reasons for the paucity of African Guyanese in the region, in the national teams, is that black kids are not interested in cricket. And it's not true. You go now in any black village, and there would be the intense agony, the intense argument about what's happening in West Indies cricket. And it's not just among the men, now even more so among women. So the society is invested in cricket, both in the Indian Guyanese community and African Guyanese community. So it is not true that African Guyanese are not interested in the game. It's that the opportunities are not given, the conditions. Look at the ball field that we have in Buxton. We've been trying for years. I know you tried as chairman of the neighborhood council to correct that. And we have not been able to correct it. So something as basic as a ground in an African Guyanese village is not taken care of. Yeah, it's a real problem. And then you add the fiasco of them giving the ground over to these committees.
Yes.
I'm happy now
that has come back to the NDC. Yeah.
But David, our judicial system is a cause for worry. I mean, these judges who have handed down these sentences, it seems as though they live in a cocoon. They should have been following the non-duality. Is it a statement that they're trying to make? I mean, in terms of...
Look, there are two explanations, Deon. One explanation is our judicial system, in many regards, remain perhaps the most conservative institution in our society, in the sense that a lot of the legacies of colonialism, the way in which justice was dispensed with during the colonial times, our judicial system reflects that. I always refer to Thurgood Marshall, the first African American on the U.S. Supreme Court. And he always said that the judicial system should take cognizance of what's happening in the larger society. And he is saying that in the United States of America, in the period of desegregation, that the Supreme Court had an important role to play in the desegregation process. And it did, starting with Brown versus Board of Education in 1954. And the majority of the Supreme Court took the position that racism in the United States was normative, and that it was institutional and structural. And so therefore, whenever a case went before them on racism, the burden was not put on the individual to prove racism. The court assumed that the systems and the institutions in the country were inherently racist, and so their engagement with the judicial system, their engagement with the law came from that perspective. And so the court was able to make some landmark rulings because it accepted the thesis that the society itself is structurally and institutionally racist against groups such as the Native Indians, groups such as African Americans. Our Supreme Court, our judicial system has not made that leap. Our judicial system engages the society from the perspective of the past, a very conservative perspective. So what they do is they take a literal meaning of the law. So the law says that you have to get your papers into the court for a petition by X time. You have to sign and get it in by X time. You didn't get it in by X time. The law says you have to get it in by X time. I throw a case out. Now, that case determines who governs. I'm talking about the petition. That petition determines who governs. That petition determines whether you get a job or I don't get it, because who governs determines who get what, when, where, and how. Yet the court could not bring itself to say, yes, in terms of the letter of the law, you were late. But in terms of the spirit of the law, this court is going to take a broad view and says that we are going to allow the petition to go through. I give that example to answer the question that our court is a very conservative court. So when a young man goes before a court charged with rape, what you see is a young man there who's not able to get the top lawyer, all right, who's not able to get the kind of representation in front of the judge and behind the scene. And so that young man is at the mercy of those who look at the law in terms of his letter. They're not taken in consideration as Justice Sotomayor, the first Hispanic judge on the United States Supreme Court. She argued as a Latina. When a young Latino or Latino comes before me charged with certain crime, I have a sense from where he comes and what would have driven him or her to commit that crime. And so in my dispensation of justice, my knowledge of what happens down there will inform. Don't say that to our judges. All right? They are not concerned about the social environment of these 90%, 95%, 99% of poor people who are coming before them. They, as we say, they throw the book at this young man or this young woman without any consideration from the environment that sent that young man or woman before them for a heinous crime. Now, I am not excusing crimes. No, not at all. What I'm saying is that the court, the justice system, has to see crime not as something alien from the society, but as something that is part of the very motion of the society. So when that young man or that young woman comes before me, if I were a judge, it's not just the young man or the young woman on trial, it's the very society that is on trial. And so therefore the answer to your question is the conservative jurisprudence is a very big factor. The second factor, of course, is the class perspective of these people. Now, who goes on to be judges and magistrates? For the most part, if you notice, the grandfather was a lawyer, the daughter is a lawyer, the son is a lawyer, the great-granddaughter is a lawyer. So what? The class nature of those who dispense justice reproduces itself at the class level. And like I said, if you are removed as someone of a particular social class from what's happening on the ground, you're not taking social class, you're not taking poverty into consideration as you dispense justice. So you're seeing justice being dispensed from a class bias in the society. There's a class bias in the way justice is dispensed in this country. And then the third factor is the political pressures on the judicial system. A young black man goes before a black magistrate or a black judge. He or she is likely to say, I have to be harsh with these young black people because I don't want anybody to say that I'm giving special favors to black people. I am not racist. And so therefore, I am going to be harsher on these young black boys and girls who are coming before me. And given the nature in which this society has labeled crime, especially petty crimes that have to do with a couple joints of marijuana, etc., etc., that has a racial face. And so the majority of people who are going for particular crimes in front of these are young black men and women, all right? And those who have certain attitudes to race, they are judging these young black men and women from, so there is a racial bias. So you have racial bias, you have class bias within the system, and when you put that together with the conservative jurisprudence, you get the kind of breakdown, if you will, of the judicial system, the non-functioning in a democratic way of the judicial system. And I think that's where it is not that the system is not working, the system is working unequally. The system works for a government minister because that government minister belongs to a government. And if you are going to litigate that government, you're really litigating the government. And the government is going to use its power, its institutional power, to manipulate the justice system in order to get a particular outcome. So the system works. The system works for the privilege. All right? And the system works another way for the underprivileged. So when they say the system works, it depends on whose perspective you're coming from, right? Those two men who got the life sentence, that's where they belong. The system works. The system, these young black predators on little girls, that's where they belong. Go rot in prison. All right? The system works. If you're Dharamlal, the society assumes that you are not a predator. The society assumes you're not a predator. The system assumes you're not a predator. Alright? And so the system gives you all the benefit of the doubt. Right? The DPP, who is supposed to advise on charges, not to advise based on your possible guilt or innocence. That's to the court. The DPP is not a court. The DPP is not there to determine guilt or innocence. But I have to say that this DPP office is one in which they are determining guilt and innocence at the level of the DPP and not at the level of the court. So the system works one way for some people and it works another way for ordinary people. I don't want to say it's just race, because if a black man in the PPP government were charged, I think the system would have gone all the way for him as they've gone for Dharamlal. So it's a mix of race and class. Class of all races don't get a fair shake before the justice system. But because the society makes certain assumption of the black man in terms of crime, the black man is the thief man, the black man is the violent man, the black man is the predator, right? So all these crimes that we are seeing is the black man is the drug smoker, right? All these crimes have a certain racial connotation that exposes working class black men and increasingly working class black women to the justice system in an uneven way. Now, I'm not saying that Indian young people are not being discriminated by the justice system, but if you look at the cases, if you go into prison and you look at the prisoners and what they are there for, you'll see a lot of them are there for crimes that are quote-unquote given a black face. Hence, both in the United States, here in Guyana, wherever black people are, they are the ones who are in prison for these kinds of offenses.
But I mean, I understand what you're saying, but you know, personally, I being on the bench and having sat and gone through all of this Dharamlal scenario, you know, how would I have felt? I mean, you're saying that they're looking at the letter of the law, but wouldn't it have somehow gone to your mind that look at this man who is before me as against Dharamlal? How do I weigh these two and how do I deal?
But that's why I said they're class prejudices, quite apart from the conservatism of the jurisprudence, right? The people on the bench are a particular class. Whether they're Indians or Africans, they're a particular class. Their sympathy for that young man and young woman there that come before them is not informed by a universality of brotherhood, a sisterhood, right? And this is the young man who's going to jump my house, right? And come in and steal my thing. Because the judges are people. They are coming, when they sit on the bench, they carry to the bench all their class prejudices, all their racial prejudices, all their regional prejudices, and of course their conservative training of the law. So when you put everything together, so you're saying, look, even if I'm conservative, my God, I live in Guyana. When I see the Dharamlal thing happened yesterday and the man get up and two little poor boy come before me, you mean I can't say God is really bad? Dharamlal just get off. Can I not? These young boys commit a crime, but instead of throwing the book at them, why don't I give a sentence that mixes reform along with punishment? So I will give them a punishment, but I will also make a plea in my punishment for the society to do something about this increasingly incidents of rape. That it is not going to be solved if I lost away these young men for the rest of their life. What you're saying is that would have been going through your mind, and you're asking why it wasn't going through Justice, I think it's Justice Singh?
Yes, Lavendra,
whoever it is, why it wasn't going through his mind. Well, I submit to you, he sits there with all his prejudices because he's a human being, right? He's a product of the society, right? And he has the power to help to shape that society. And his thing is that we're going to get rid of rape in the society by losing those two men away for the rest of their life.
But a particular question about the judiciary, and here we're talking about the independence. The chairman of Exxon went to a meeting in the United States, and he was able to say to his gathering that I'm assured that we are not going to, the book is not going to be thrown at us in the situation, the case that was brought before the court, because the president assured me that we are going to be paying this 6 billion or 6 million, whatever. What does it say about how can the president assure him if he hasn't gotten that assurance from the trial judge?
Well, he could have gotten assurance from the trial judge, but he could be using his bully pulpit as a way of publicly pressuring the judicial system. So it could be a combination of all of that. Listen, what we have in Guyana is executive tyranny. The executive branch is the most powerful branch of government. It is the most powerful council of decision making. The judicial branch, the executive branch, meaning the PPP that controls the executive branch, they control the legislative branch. All right? The executive branch determines who goes on the Judicial Service Commission, that after so many years, they finally yesterday was able to put in service the Judicial Service Commission. All right? The president has the last say, along with the opposition leader, on whether you become a substantive Chief Justice or a substantive Chancellor of the Judiciary. So in many regards, in a real practical way, the executive branch has a lot of sway, and there are little or no checks and balances on the executive. This is the key, right? We have separation of powers, but not strict separation of powers. You have a cabinet member sits in parliament. Parliament is supposed to be an oversight of the cabinet. If you have a cabinet member sitting in the Minister of Education sitting in Parliament, you're asking the Minister of Education to oversight herself as Minister of Education in the executive branch. So we do not have strict separation of powers. So we don't have checks and balances in the system. Now the Westminster system that we got from Britain assumes that those who are in power will govern based on the spirit of the law. So although the letter of the law does not give you strict separation, the assumption is that the spirit of the law assumes strict separation. What this PPP government has done is that it has governed based on the strict letter of the law. What that means is that where the law doesn't say that you can't do something, they do it. No, when the law says you can't, if the law doesn't say you can't do something, that doesn't mean you can do it. But because the law is assuming, all right, that you recognize for the system to work, you shouldn't do it, all right? You can beat your child because you are that child parent. But if you know that beating a child is going to alienate that child further, going to make that child run away from home, you're not going to do it. You're going to find some other way of discipline. So I'm saying this government, because it has the legal power to do something, it does it. Right? And it doesn't allow the system to work in a democratic way. And so the judicial branch itself has become compromised. All right? Now, go back to 2020. The PPP said, we saw some chicanery at Ashman. Under normal circumstances, when a matter like that goes before the court will say, come back to me with a petition. In 2020, the court didn't do that. The court said to GCOM, correct it. GCOM asked how we can correct it. The lawyer said to GCOM, you have the power to do anything to correct anything. GCOM then proceed, all right, to a recount. It goes before the court. The court upholds it. All right? The recount then opens a can of worms. The opposition goes back to the court. The court said, don't worry, the can of worms. Bring the can of worms in a petition. So in one instance up front, there was a can of worms, and the court tells GCOM, fix it. GCOM, in the process of fixing, open another can of worms. The court this time didn't tell GCOM, fix it. Meaning the 40-odd boxes, put them away. All those who were dead in the country, take all those who were in the country. The court said, bring that can of worms. The court was biased. It allowed GCOM to correct one can of worms. And then when GCOM tried to correct that can of worms and it bumped into another can of worms, the court did not treat that can of worms the same. So the court itself becomes so embroiled in our election that it eventually took sides. It didn't set out to do that. But the logic of where it started, that is, the court become too much embroiled in those elections in a partisan way. And it ended up handing down towards the back end. It ended up handing down partisan decisions because, as the court said, the findings of the recount should render the election null and void. It would have put us in uncharted waters. So, in order to shut it down, the court shafted those who discovered the second can of worms, meaning the coalition. The court shafted them. And so, once the court started to go down that road in 2020, in post-2020, the court itself became compromised. Because, you see, the court is part of a system. It's an institution that operates as part of a system. So once you compromise yourself in something as profound as an election, you become compromised as an institution post-election. And we in the Working People's Alliance have been trying to make that point, that all that we are seeing now in the breakdown of the system, the bad behavior of the PPP, the unwillingness to obey their own court, appealing their own court decision, all of those things are as a consequence of what we allowed to happen in those 5 months. In those 5 months, we allowed the institutions of the society to become biased. We allowed GCOM to become biased. We allowed the courts to become biased. We allowed the police to become biased. And so, in the post-election era, what we have is a system that is so compromised that is going to take us at a minimum a decade. At a minimum, but it will take us about 2-3 decades to fix the damage that was done in 2020.
Yeah, but would it take a legal process? Because all the way down to the CCJ, our constitution, I don't even know how to interpret it anymore because of all the things that would have been done and said in relation to, from the Chief Justice right
up to the CCJ.
Our constitution was battered, it was tossed here, it was tossed there. You got a sense that what should have been no longer is.
That's right.
Alright?
Because take for example our appeal court, and the case that, well, on election matters, our appeal court is the final court. Yeah. And this was part of the charter of the CCJ, that where a local court was the highest court in a matter what CCJ says, we now take jurisdiction. So you're correct, my brother. You're correct. In a sense, our system, you see, in a federal system, our justice system is part of a federal system. We have the local system, and then we have the regional system, along the CCJ. And you're supposed to have what is called a balance between the two systems. right? But what has happened is that the CCJ has taken all the control over our legal system. So our domestic legal system does not have any autonomy left. If you look at any federal system, look at the United States that has a federal system. The state courts, the county courts, the circuit courts still have enormous power. In fact, the U.S. Supreme Courts a lot of times turn their face away. They refuse to hear certain cases, thus allowing the rulings of the lower court to stand. The CCJ could have done that in that thing. It could have said, the charter is clear. We are going to allow the ruling of the appeal court in Guyana to stand. CCJ didn't do that. Now, were they motivated by partisan concern? I don't know. I'm not in their brain, right? You know, I have my view, right? What I do know and what all of us know is that the outcome was partisan. And in doing that, you've compromised the system. You've compromised the system.
So everybody took jurisdiction.
That's it. The federal system no longer is intact in our legal system. Our legal system is now based on the supremacy of the CCJ. And I don't see a supremacy clause in our constitution, nor a supremacy clause in the charter of the CCJ.
So how do we fix that?
That has to be fixed by political solutions. It means that leaders, the society has to push its leaders to correct that. And this is where we now go back to the legislature. The parliament has to fix that. Our parliament has to fix that. Our parliament has to pass laws restoring the autonomy of our court. But who controls our National Assembly? The executive branch. Who controls the executive branch? The PPP. Who benefited from the removal of the autonomy of the local legal system? The PPP. So unless there is a movement that forces the PPP and PNC to sit down and agree to legislation restoring the autonomy of our legal system, we're in serious trouble.
Now, I want to focus briefly on the government's wanton, I don't know how to describe it, but it seems as though Jack Deon is of the view that he can incur billions of dollars in debt with the view that, Guyana is going to be getting all this money later on along the road, and so we can borrow now, and then later on we're going to be able to service this debt. Is that rational economic thinking?
Well, it's an economic school of thought, right? That you assume. In the United States they do that. The government borrows money. Every now and again, they say if you don't sign this thing to broaden our what they call it in the United States, if you don't sign this bill in order to broaden our borrowing scope and so on, the economy shuts down. The capitalist economy, in its neoliberal manifestation, operates like that. You borrow against what you expect to come in. Now, when you're a large economy like the United States, you can take that risk, right? If the economy flounders on the East Coast because of hurricane, right? America is so big that the economy in the Midwest and the West Coast is not affected, right? You know, if the car industry in the United States is having a bad period, the citrus industry will kick in, or the computer and other technological thing will kick in, and so on and so on. Big economies are able to take that risk, right? Whether it is the right thing we are doing, I'm not an economist. I would not be able to say. The risk, however, in doing that is that you are borrowing against resources that don't belong to you and the party. And you're doing this borrowing without consultation with the representatives of the rest of society. Ultimately, if, let's say, the price of oil on the world market goes down to bare gravy, it means we will not be able to honor our debt. Right? What happens then? Who is responsible? All of us are responsible. The government will have to come to us and probably raise taxes, and so on and so on and so forth, in order to pay back that debt, because the economy is not bringing in the kind of revenue, because it depends on oil in the world market. The prices go down, we are suffering, and so forth. Now, when you're making those big decisions, you have to consult. It has to be a consensus, right? So whether it's right or wrong to do it, I don't know. I'm not an economist, and economists will argue whether it's the right approach or the wrong approach. Whether it's the right or wrong approach, my thing is that there should be consensus on it. You do not put a country in that level of debt based on the whims and fancy of a few people sitting around a table. You see? And so, for me, it is the lack of consensus that is the issue here. If we were to have consultation, maybe we will decide to temper our borrowing. Alright? Because you'll have more heads around the table who will say, no, don't go that far. Because in the next 15 years, so and so could happen, so and so could happen. But you have a few people around the table who are in a dictatorial manner making these decisions, which could have life and death effect on the rest of us. Because if we don't have food, we don't have medicine, because we can't pay our debt and all those kinds of things, it affects ordinary people.
But the other aspect of concern is the lack of parliamentary oversight. You know what has been happening?
Yes.
So it means that these spending, this one-ton contracts of billions of dollars, there's billions of dollars for that. And when the Committee of Supply and so on are supposed to meet to deal with these expenditures and so on, the PPP are not turning up.
Yes.
So it means that they're doing what they want.
Yeah, they immobilize the institutions. They immobilize the parliament because they have control of the parliament, because remember, we don't have strict separation of powers. So the people who are sitting in the executive also sit in parliament. The people who the Committee of Supply and the Public Accounts Committee is supposed to bring before and take, some of them are themselves on the PAC. They have rigged the rules to ensure that the quorum that you need, that they can manipulate the quorum and make the committees don't work. They have immobilized the parliament. I say that every day on my program. To get Guyanese to understand here, this thing is not just about we lost an election and the PPP win an election and the PPP make inroads in Georgetown, and this thing is more serious, as you were pointing out. Alright? What you have is a one-party system. We have the shell of a multi-party system. But in practice, you have a single dominant party. Alright? So you have a multi-party framework. But in the way in which we govern, it's a one-party state. It's a one, and because we're accustomed to a multi-party state, we ask questions, we analyze situations against the background of the assumption of a multi-party state. Until at the end of the process, we say, oh my God, right? The Darren Land thing was a clear example of that. All of us said, let the system work. What system? A one-party system is going to work one way. But remember, we start from the assumption that the system is democratic. And the democracy in our system assumes that the actors have a commitment to democracy. You see, that is the assumption of Westminster. Right? The United States were concerned about that. And so they did not depend on the actors. They put in place systems. So when the actors act in a certain way, the system, look at what's happening with Trump. Trump attempted as an actor to subvert the American system. So what you have right now is a struggle between the institutions and the actor. At least there is a struggle. Here in Guyana, the actor, that is why we talk about Jack Dew. Because Jack Dew embodies the system. The actor becomes the system. The actor is a substitute for the system.
So you're actually saying that democracy doesn't exist?
No, it exists in democratic forms, democratic procedures. The president, the procedure says that the president must consult with the opposition leader to set up the Public Service Commission. The opposition leader said 2 people in that Public Service Commission are PPP activists. But the consultation is finished, right? The president goes ahead and he announces a fraud, a bias Public Service Commission. But he would have satisfied the procedure. The substance of what he does is undemocratic. Right? The procedure follows the rules. Alright? But the substance is not a democratic extension of the rules. So we don't have substantive democracy. At best, what we have is formal democracy. That is the forms. So today, when it suits us, we reduce democracy to elections. Once you have an election, and the Americans and the British say it's free and fair, it's free and fair. Democratic procedure. So we reduce democracy to forms. Never mind coming out of those elections, but before coming out, never mind going into those elections. The elections were rigged by a rigged voters list, by lack of a way in which you can account for people who may vote multiple times, no accountability, no biometric, none of that. Never mind, the forms themselves are compromised, right? And worse yet, never mind when you say the elections are free and fair, tomorrow those who benefit from your free and fair election begins to mow down the homes of its own citizens. The elections are free and fair, they are democratic, and tomorrow the quote-unquote winners begin to behave in the most undemocratic manner.
But I read somewhere there has been no public statement except that the opposition leader met with the Secretary of State. But people are saying that he was advised to work with the government in a kind of collaborative instead of in an antagonistic way. I don't know if you have any.
Well, I don't know that, but the Americans have made clear in several statements over the last 3 years, statements through the State Department, statements through the Vice President, statements from Blinken, statements from Hakeem Jeffries, that their solution to our problem is what they call equitable governance. Equitable governance in politics, equitable governance in the economy. They've made it very clear that they prefer some form of power sharing. So one can assume that logically they would have said that to Norton, they would have said that to the PPP. Now, the Americans, unless their interest is threatened, they are not going to come in and beat them and bring them to a table. Now, if their economic interest is threatened by instability in the country, they will beat them, carry them some way, and make them come to an agreement. Insofar as the Americans' interests are not threatened, they will allow them to sit down and work out. History has shown us that our two major parties do not come to the table until we are about to drown. They allow us to go even in the water. Some government carry to the edge, water edge. In Guyana, they carry you in the water itself. And when you're about to make your last gap, then is when they act. That has been the history of those two political parties. So one can assume that the message to both of them is that you all got to work together. Who is going to blink first? We don't know.
Well, let's hope that because the country continues to suffer, particularly people, there is no sense that there is a willingness to deal with the human suffering.
Yeah.
And you see the president going to Canada and saying that they must giving a kind of carte blanche, to the Canadians to come and set up their institutions there for training so that they can actually take our human resources.
Yes, and so you're buying their silence, you're buying their complicity in what and that's the point I'm making. When you have the enormous power that the government has, there has to be something that brings you to the table. You're not going to come to the table like that. In that regard, there's no pressure on the opposition to bring the government to the table. And I think that's where the opposition, in my estimation, in our estimation in the WPA, where the opposition is found wanting. That we don't think that the opposition is creative enough in opening up space for itself to pressure the government to come to the table. You see, the opposition doesn't have natural space. There's no space for the opposition in Parliament. It has some institutional space in the PAC. The PPP has taken away that institutional space. So there's no institutional space for the opposition. The opposition has to open up space for itself. And it has to be creative in doing so. And our estimation is that we have been found wanting. We have been found wanting in the opposition in that regard of opening up space for ourselves in order to bring the other side to the table.
All right, well, Dr. Hinds.
Yes, I know the cold, the allergies. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right, I want to thank you for being on the program. And of course, before you leave, we're going to have more of these discussions, but
I'm here all the time. I'm here all the time. I'm available. All right.
Brother Ogun, like me, is on the way with you.
Yes, I know.
Yeah, he has, you can barely hear him. He speaks. But it's a pleasure being here. We look forward to seeing us next week, same time, same channel, for another program of Walk Around the Groundings. Do have a good day.